welcome back to another episode of the Always About People show. Beamer,
Here I am.
she's in the house.
I'm in the house.
Hey, well, Chris Allen here, your regular host. Beamer, you've been on the show before.
I have.
Our guests know who you are, but there may be some guests who are looking at your name trying to figure out, wait a minute, Beamer Wilson, you got married.
She's gone. Beamer Wilson is gone. Beamer Barnes is here.
Oh, the Beamer Barnes.
Barnes, BB.
So welcome to the show, Beamer.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Beamer's here in Charlotte. We're coming to you live. For those of you who have joined us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, we're glad that you're here. We are live. Please leave your comments. Please leave your thoughts. Ask questions. We want to engage with you today. We're excited about this show. The title, as you may have seen, hopefully it captured your attention. Why isn't my team keeping up?
Why are they doing this? They're sabotaging our business.
That's right. Why isn't my team keeping up? We work with leaders across the country. And unfortunately, we've heard this question before. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes this question leads to some deeper conversations,
right?
Some deeper assumptions, potentially some biases. But what's really beneath the question is, hey, I'm moving at a pace that everybody else should be keeping up with.
Right.
Why aren't they keeping up with me?
Follow me.
Do it. And so from a leadership perspective, what this gets at is really a deeper understanding of how your team is operating, how they think, how they process information, the speed at which they process, and just a basic understanding that not all people are created the same.
Right.
That people think differently, they have different processing speeds, they have different modes of thinking through. And I think the basic assumption is that if you can't keep up with me, you're not smart.
Or you're not motivated.
Or there's something else going on. Like they must be working from home and they're not actually doing their job.
Right. They have kids at home, schools were closed, XYZ.
Yeah. They're probably running errands and that's why they haven't gotten back to me.
Right. They're not at their desk. They're cooking dinner. They're doing laundry. They're not working.
So in order for people to keep up with me, bring everybody back to the office so that I can walk out into the hallway, see everybody at their desks, in their chairs, on their computers, and at least I'll know that they're doing something.
Because this problem didn't exist before work from home, obviously.
Oh, that's right. We never heard this question before.
Nope.
All right. So what we want to address is really the flaws in that thinking, or really in that asking of the question. It's kind of like, why isn't my team keeping up? Well, there are actually potentially a number of reasons why. And so we want to explore that today. We thought it would be a fun topic. Again, in this month of February, I can't believe that we're already in the second month of the year.
I know, it's crazy.
People are into their strategic planning processes and they're thinking this through. And now, again, as the world begins to change a little bit, it's kind of brought this thinking about, hey, maybe we need to get back to the office.
Right.
Is this hybrid thing here to stay? Is this remote thing here to stay? And then leaders are asking the question, how do I keep my teams up to speed?
Right.
And so we thought we would just have a conversation about it. We're going to go back and forth. Both of us have been doing some reading on this topic. The Beamer Barnes is in her master's program. And so she brings all this wisdom to the show. But we want to address this idea head on.
Right.
And that is that sometimes leaders aren't taking the time to understand their teams. Would you agree with that?
Wholeheartedly. It's that idea of deploying empathy. And as a leader, like trying to execute and deploy the empathy to be able to understand, why is my team operating the way that they are, instead of assuming they're just not working, they just don't care, whatever other fill in the blank we want to put in.
All right. So I'm thinking about some of our guests who are watching. They immediately hear the word empathy and they think, oh boy, soft skills. That's soft. I'm trying to drive results here. I'm trying to perform. Don't give me this soft stuff. Let's come up with a proper definition of empathy so that people don't just throw it out.
Right.
When you think of empathy, how would you define it?
I would define empathy probably as putting yourself in the other person's shoes. That age-old saying, like, until you've walked a mile in their shoes, but really just trying to understand their point of view. I believe it's, is it Stephen Covey that talks about how it's like, it's not about being understood. It's about understanding.
Yeah. Seek first to understand before being understood.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I think understood or understanding is probably how I would define empathy. It's like, take the time to understand.
Right.
And at the same time, when we think of empathy, most of us will jump to some conclusion.
Right.
So we will jump to some conclusion or some bias about the other person or about why they can't keep up or about their speed without ever taking the time to understand what's actually going on.
Correct. And whenever we do that, we actually cut the diversity of our team down too, because we limit their talent and we limit their ability based on our thinking of how they're going to perform. And so if we have women that are on our team and they are also moms and they are also wives, and there's any level of performance, well, it must be there's something going on at home. They're distracted with their kids or whatever the case may be. And it's not always the truth. Sometimes it can be, but most of the time, probably not.
Yeah, it's an assumption.
Yeah.
I just finished reading Adam Grant's book, Think Again. And the premise of this book is really about identifying the biases in each of us. And it's hard to do, but this whole concept of thinking again is when you have a thought about why someone's doing something the way they're doing it or why they're not doing what you ask them to do, there's an initial thinking that happens and a belief system that you probably have as an individual. But then how do we pause there, think again to understand the full context? And in many ways, that's the definition of empathy, taking the time to understand, put yourself in their shoes. So Beamer, let's go back to this concept of maybe minimizing the diversity on the team. Instead, we always say on this show, we want to get highly practical. So we want to talk about these issues from a philosophical standpoint or psychology or sociology, whatever, but we also want to bring it down to the practical. When we think about creating or sustaining or even promoting the diversity on our teams, what are some things we should keep in mind?
Oh man, in promoting the diversity on our teams, some things to keep in mind. I think ultimately that there are multiple ways to get to the same result. There are multiple different perspectives that can be considered that are going to take us further than what the original idea actually is. That's just a few off the top of my head.
Okay, let's go into the way people think and process.
Yes.
Because part of diversity of a team is not all people process the same way that leader does. So if you're a leader watching, you might be saying, okay, I can agree with that question. I've never actually asked the question, why isn't my team keeping up verbally? But I've definitely asked it in my head. I feel it. So if that's you, we want to get practical for you. If you're on the other side of that and you're sitting at the table as a contributor, and you feel that someone's asking that,
and there's so much pressure of like, I'm doing everything that I can. I'm burned out. I'm tired. Like, what else does this person want from me? I'm not taking my lunch break. I haven't gone to the bathroom. Like, I'm literally working nonstop. Why is this still not enough? Should I leave this company?
Yeah. And so we want both of you to both camps, the leader and if you're just a contributor on the team. And I didn't mean to say if you are a contributor on the team, we want you to feel a sense of value in who you are, how you think, how you process, and help you understand the other side. So let's talk about something that's rarely talked about. I don't hear many people talk about the speed of processing as a significant differentiator or a way of diversifying a team. It feels like there's a lot talked around skills, abilities, talents. Not much is said around speed of processing. Let's talk about that for a few minutes.
So this actually came up last week whenever we were talking through something, and there's this team where there's this one guy who is a little bit more narrow-minded in what his task load is. Whenever he's given a bunch of different tasks, things start to get really discombobulated, very overwhelmed, and it seems like nothing is getting done because there's too much stimulus. And so we started researching this very idea of what it means to have like an informational process. And from cognitive psychology, what it says is that you have your stimulus, and then that will transfer into your input, your storage, your output, and your response. And so there it is, information processing model. And so if we're using this as an example, because obviously we do want to remain really practical, is that let's say that as an employer or as a manager, you are telling your team, these are all the things that we need to get done by the end of the week. It's Wednesday. I know that this is new information based from what our executive team has pushed forward from the meeting that they had on Tuesday. So now it's Wednesday. These projects need to get done, and go do it. And so as an employee, as an individual contributor, I hear that and I take that input and I start to analyze it. It's going to go into the storage bank. And in the storage bank is where it's like, okay, based on these experiences, the same exact thing happened 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, like I've seen this before.
Right. Like this is normal. Like this tends to happen. I'm not going to give myself a lot of pressure on this because it, like right now, that's what you're saying, but it may not actually be a huge deal. And so I'm going to put that in my output to like think and analyze what my response is going to be. Therefore, responding of, I don't feel a ton of pressure in regards to this because this tends to happen a lot in our organization.
I've seen this before. The pressure's there, but things change.
Correct.
So based upon my previous experiences that are stored in my memory, the stimulus comes in, the input's there, the storage memory and bank is there. Now, what do I do? Well, I'm not going to move on this.
Yeah.
I'm just going to wait and see what happens. Now, you have a leader on the other side saying, I thought we discussed this yesterday. I thought we made a decision. Why haven't we moved on this? I thought it would be done by 5 o'clock today. But yet we're not taking the time to understand what's really going on in that situation. And as leaders, we're not taking the opportunity to realize, wow, in past experiences, I've moved the team forward and then changed.
Waste of time.
Yeah. And so the team is basically saying, we don't know when to move forward anymore because
everything is important.
Yeah. In the past, you've pushed an initiative that was outside of the initiatives that we had already prioritized. I thought I had my task list ready, and now you're pushing something new. It's like another shiny object.
Exactly. Which we talked about in the goal setting show a few weeks back, crazy, in January. And that whenever we set our goals as an organization, we have our annual goals, we have our quarterly goals that are ultimately feeding into each other. And so whenever we shy away from that, we're just throwing shiny objects up. And then we're wondering, well, why is my team not keeping up?
Yep.
And trust has been compromised. It's not that it's broken, but it's definitely been compromised whenever we just start throwing things out. And so we have to understand, like, what is an idea and what is an initiative?
That's right. And so I think the takeaway, or maybe the practical application, would be for leaders, make sure that you're communicating as best you can. Hey, team, this is an idea. I don't need you to do anything with it. Let's let it sit for 24 hours. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Let's process this together before we do anything. And then the flip side would be, hey, team, this was not prioritized before.
Yeah.
But this is an urgent issue. We're all going to work together on this. We're going to push this through. And here's when I need it by. Or here's when we need to have this done. So that's when we're referring to changes of initiatives and changes of priorities. There's a whole nother aspect of kind of thinking and your team keeping up, which is around just communication styles.
Yes.
And how we communicate with one another. And the example that I'll start with is many CEOs and leaders will have a conversation with employees, whether it be in a conference room or in a one-on-one. And they'll leave that meeting thinking, this person just doesn't have the ability to keep up with me.
Right.
Like they're not giving me any nonverbal communication. They're not connecting with me.
They're just staring at me.
Yeah. And they nobody says this, but the thought is they must not be as intelligent as some of my other team members.
Oh, absolutely.
Don't you believe that?
Oh, all the time. All the time this happens. And you walk away as the manager, leader, CEO, boss, founder, owner who has all of this pressure, stakeholders, all of the things that you have going on. And you're questioning, why is this person on my team?
Right. Like so-and-so on my team is so much more effective at understanding what I'm trying to accomplish. Why can't this person keep up? And oftentimes it manifests as frustration. It manifests as, I just don't feel like I can get my point across. I'm not sure they're hearing me. I'm not sure they understand the urgency. We've heard all of these lines before, but we think there might be something else going on.
Correct. Because what happens, just because somebody is like sitting across from you, just looking at you, and we were talking about this morning, or the person that's like smiling and nodding and is like, yes, but there's like somebody's playing ping pong upstairs. Like they're not really listening, but they're giving the nonverbal cue of like, yes, I understand and I get it. And so the importance though that comes in to looking at performance metrics and seeing like, where is it actually at? Or is this an opportunity for us to kind of just have open dialogue of like, whenever I ask you a question or I'm giving you XYZ, it just seems like there's nothing there. Like it's a blank slate.
So what's really going on?
What's really going on?
I think the picture that I have in my head is a leader who's in a conversation, maybe with their executive team, and they're looking around the room, and 4 members of the executive team are nodding their heads and giving nonverbal affirmation of whatever's being said. And then there's another member of the team who's sitting there with a blank face, not giving any sort of nonverbal affirmation. And the assumption in the mind of the leader is that that person isn't connecting. They're not keeping up. They don't get what we're saying. And that is rarely the case.
Correct. Because oftentimes, correct me if I'm wrong, if you were to ask that person, what are you thinking? Would you like to share? You haven't said anything, like, please speak up. They're the ones that have like those really wise, like one-liners. That's like a heavy hammer in the meeting. And it's like, whoa, that was so good and so necessary. Why did they not say something sooner? Well, based on the stimulus that was in the room, they had to observe everything. They were taking it all in, storing it so that their output is this very wise response, but it takes time to get to that.
And I think what that points to is that, again, people are processing information differently.
Correct.
And so the individuals who can sit in a room and nod their head, whether they're actually with you or not, the nonverbal affirmation is not always a sign that they're with you. It could be just a habit. Like they're used to just nodding their head.
I'm agreeing.
Yeah. Like I'm in agreement and we're good. The person who is deep in thought, trying to actually connect all the dots, I went into like dots.
There you go.
It may actually be putting the pieces together. And instead of just verbally or non-verbally responding, that they are connecting more of the pieces together, but just need a little bit of time to respond.
Right.
So how do we have empathy for those people?
It's a great question. I really like assessments and being able to understand like other people's motivations and what they're coming from. We've talked a lot about strength finders. One of my favorites is actually the Enneagram, just for personally, like being able to understand basic fears, basic desires, and that sort of thing. But you're able to also understand like instincts. Is it a heart instinct, head instinct, gut instinct, in those different things. So you'll have people that process internally. I am not gifted with that. I am definitely an external processor. I talk things out loud. And then once it's done, I'm like, cool. I have like felt all the feelings and thought all the thoughts, and now it's done. I am now married, so I know everything about marriage.
Mhm.
My husband
Expert.
is very much an internal processor. So it's a awesome little match. And sometimes in this instance, we're like magnets, whenever they like don't necessarily connect. And I think that happens also, obviously, professionally, whenever you have an internal processor, but you need external affirmation. And it's just like those magnets that aren't connecting. But if you can really practice the empathy to understand where the other person is coming from,
Mhm.
having an assessment, whether that's Strength Finders, Enneagram, Clarity 15, whatever it might be, to be able to really understand where and how that person processes information so that those magnets can click.
That's good. It's great. And I think this idea of empathy would be taking the time to really understand how people process. So when you have somebody who needs a little bit more time to process, you might even make that sort of known amongst the group.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost seen as like you value somebody because they take the time to process.
Right.
And so I would just encourage you to publicly promote different thinking, different processing speeds. So
Right.
you can't always just affirm the people who process quickly, who give you the nonverbal responses. How can you also affirm the people who, hey, I realize it's going to take 24 hours for you to process. I desperately value, I covet your thoughts. Tomorrow, can you circle back with me and let me know what you've sort of taken from today and how you want to respond? And so give people the chance to respond to kind of what you're talking about, initiatives, priorities, and all that.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that it also goes into whenever we're looking at promotional opportunities, especially if you're an individual contributor, often it can be interpreted that I need to be quick on my feet. I need to be moving. I need to be fast. And as managers, we can sometimes overlook employees that are not the first ones to respond. But just because you're the first to give a response doesn't necessarily mean that the skill set is there. It just means you responded first.
That's right. It could be like completely wrong answer. It could be the completely wrong priority or
Mhm.
initiative or even solution. But simply because they responded quickly, you as a leader think, wow, they're keeping up with me.
Right.
When in
They
reality,
want this.
yeah, when in reality, that's just how they're processing. Whereas an individual who is maybe not all in with you immediately, maybe isn't non-verbally communicating and agreeing, maybe they're deep in thought. We need to somehow give them the time to process because
Right.
because again, it's not, wow, intelligence is defined by the speed of their response.
Right.
That's not true.
No.
And so how do we create an environment where we're gathering feedback from all of our team members, where we're taking the time to honor and value everyone, whether you're thinking on the spot, a verbal processor, a nonverbal processor, you need time to process your process from input to, or stimulus to the input to the storage to sort of what's happening as an export. That process and that time is different for each individual.
Right. Absolutely. And I think also something to consider is that whenever you have people on your teams, I shared the example of somebody who needed more of a narrow lane than multiple lanes. Multitasking isn't everybody's best
Jam.
It's not. There we go. And so it's okay if you realize as a manager or as an individual contributor, this is the environment that I flourish best in as a manager, being able to identify if I give that person 8 things, it's not going to feed them. I'm someone that if my job is the exact same every single day, you'll lose me. I I'm not gifted or skilled in that way. I need 8 things, and I will work on item number 1 for 10 minutes and then jump to item number 7 for, 3 minutes and then like just bounce all day. And that works for me. But there are individual people that would drive them insane. And it does drive them insane. I have several friends like that. And they're like, you're all over the place. And I'm like, but I'm organized to myself. And that
Yep.
works.
If it works for you.
Exactly. But it doesn't always work that way. And so I think that it's remembering that if you have someone or you are someone that I just need to know the 2 things that need to get done for our team, because that's the best value add that I'm going to be able to give at this moment.
All right. I want to cover one other thought. And this is on the insecurity of a leader, particularly as it applies to this remote working environment.
Right.
So as a leader, if what's going through my head is my team isn't keeping up with me, we need to bring them into an office, or they're not keeping up because I don't know if they're working or not.
Right.
They're not keeping up because the moms are shuttling kids around or helping them with school or
Right.
whatever. Doing errands. I mean, I've heard all kinds of assumptions from
Right.
leaders. And so the insecurity of the leader says, in order for me to know what they're doing, I need to bring them back to the office. I'd like to just address how flawed that thinking is in general, because it assumes that just because somebody's in an office, that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Right. But how often a lot of jobs do require this, but how often do we actually have 8 hours of very intense, focused work to do?
Yeah. Like nobody goes to an office and sits at their desk for 8 straight hours without getting up, going to the bathroom, taking a break for lunch,
Engaging with other employees,
colleagues,
like
conversations with
and we want that,
peers.
right? Like,
Yeah.
we need team buy-in. We need that human interaction as well.
But my insecurity as a leader gets settled when I just know where everyone is. Like I know that they're here, they're in the building, they're in the room, they're somewhere around here. And it somehow helps me settle the fears and insecurities that I have. So we asked this question of this episode: why isn't my team keeping up? And the reality is your team may be keeping up. You might be the problem.
Yes.
Like you might be the problem because of your own issues, insecurities, and fears.
Right.
And beliefs about people. Because one of my favorite things to say is like, people don't wake up in the morning and roll out of bed, feet hitting the ground, and go, man, I can't wait to get to work to really screw up today.
Right.
Like, nobody rolls out of bed going, man, how can I do as little as possible and get away with it? How
and
can
still
I
get paid?
Yeah, how can I convince my boss that I'm actually working when I'm actually not doing anything? People want to do good work. They want to be valued for what they do, and they want to be affirmed for it.
Right. They want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. All of us, we all want to belong. We all want to be accepted.
The only reason that somebody would be moving away from that is if they don't feel valued, they don't feel appreciated,
right. and they don't feel safe.
And so they're basically looking for something else anyway.
Right.
Beamer, I believe that this is one of the biggest problems in the workplace today.
Yeah.
Specifically with this move towards remote work and hybrid work. We have to come to a new set of beliefs.
Yes.
if I could just be Adam Grant for a second, I would say, think again. And so these assumptions and these biases that we come into the workplace with, assuming that people who process quickly are smarter or more intelligent. People who think a certain way are smarter or more intelligent. People who give us nonverbal affirmation are smarter or more intelligent. And that is not true.
That is not true.
How can we continue to understand people better?
By deploying empathy and trying to understand where they're coming from. And as a leader, like what Chris was sharing, some ideas that maybe you can implement would be to develop a performance metric or a scorecard. HR departments are phenomenal and know how to do this. We also know how to do this and are willing to help you at any capacity that would require. But really to be able to find out, like, where and how are my employees performing? Because we do fill in the blank whenever there's dead space. We're going to. And so, but also your employees shouldn't have to constantly be getting back to the text message style emails that often come in. Text message style emails, meaning you send 15 of them and they just went to the bathroom. Or they were gone for 5 minutes.
You put the entire message in the subject line. That's a text message email.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, I was telling Beamer about some research that Microsoft has been doing through their Teams platform. And the length of time for meetings has increased. The frequency of meetings has increased. The frequency of unscheduled meetings has increased. And the amount of time that people take to respond to messages has shortened. And so there's some crazy statistic now about the number of messages people will respond to within 5 minutes. And so we have now turned an entire workplace into professional notification responders. And then we wonder why people can't keep up with us. We don't give them any time to do anything. We just want them to immediately respond to every notification. And so I would just ask leaders, number one, understand your people, understand their speed of processing, understand how they think, how they process information, understand some of what they believe and what's stored in their thought process.
Right.
And then take the time to understand and give people space to think and respond appropriately. And then leaders, this one's a hard one, but deal with your own insecurities and fears.
Right. And if you need to talk to people, schedule one-on-ones bi-monthly, like once a month, once a quarter minimum, just to be able to understand what are they working on, where the problems are, and just to kind of get a pulse on your people. It's a way that you're able to care and add value, and to be able to monitor where your workforce is and where their attention is going, and to be able to course correct as you go along instead of just assuming that they're not doing things.
That's right. So full circle, Beamer. Why isn't my team keeping up? Well, there are a lot of reasons. Some of them might be tied to thought processes, speed of processing. Some of them might be tied to the insecurity of a leader. Some of them might be tied to just a lack of direction or a lack of clarity. And so what we would ask from the Always About People team is that you would take the time to understand each person on your team, each individual, that you would share how you like to process, and that you would hear and begin to understand how they like to process, and that you would take that into account as you build a fully diversified team. Beamer, any final thoughts?
Yes. For our individual contributors, one thing that you might consider doing as well is if you have a boss that you're like, it's all the time, the pressure, whatever it is, maybe just creating a space, if you feel psychologically safe, to ask the question of, how am I doing? How can I do better? What can I take off of your plate? What it does is it builds trust, and it shows that you have the initiative to do things differently, and just to check on yourself instead of feeling that pressure of, I don't think they like me. I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job, and what that might look like.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in to this conversation. I hope that you were able to take away a few practical insights. Remember, it's possible that your team is keeping up. Maybe you should stop asking the question. Paul Chabai, thanks for being with us. Craig Peters, great to see you on the screen. Heather McCullough, great to see you as well. Or Welch. But we appreciate you guys tuning in live, leaving comments. Again, for those of you who are watching this after the live show, you can still leave questions, comments. We'll get to them. We'll respond to them. We'd love to. But for those of you who tune in live every week, we thank you. And please like, share, subscribe, connect, whatever language on whatever platform. They all call it something differently. So we appreciate you joining with us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Beamer.
Thanks, Chris.